Hello, YouTube. Um, Today I will be reviewing one of the best comic book films from the early 2000s, and that is Ang Lee's Hulk. Now, for those of you who think that this movie sucks and or sucked when you saw it, you would be wrong. Rewatching this for the first time in many, many years actually did not suck at all. It sucked and it blew at the same time. Oh my god. Oh my god. This movie. Oh. Alright, well, I'm here, so I might as well review it, but before I do anything, I need a beer. Because I'm not gonna lie to you guys. This was painful. This was I the this was torture. Oh my god. All right, let me break this down. Um so you have the movie opens in on a desert base in 90 in 60 66. um yeah, 66, with David Banner telling telling General Ross, Betty's father, um, saying that there's simply no way to shield. Um, there's simply no way to shield, the body. Um, he's talking with Ross about. So David Banner is involved in some sort of like government. Is involved with like some sort of government experiment, and um, and he's saying that there's simply no way to shield the body from every single weaponized agent. He's saying, um, but he's saying, he goes, but instead, I can basically make, I can basically make, super immune. I can, he's saying, there's basically no way, to shield the body, from every single, weaponized agent. But instead, I can make super immune systems. I can make people, or I can make, I can make, super, I can make immune systems, better than they ever were by strengthening, by strengthening um, the human cellular um, response. And Ross basically says to him, yeah, and Ross basically says to him, he's like, Banner, I know where you're going, um, but um, but manipulating, the immune system is both dangerous and stupid. And just like this movie, well, minus the dangerous part, but it's just stupid, but whatever. Um, but so the so the president, science advisors, made it, absolutely clear to him, no human subjects. Um, he was he was doing his experiments on, like various animals and stuff like that, um, and seeing, if there were any like results, but so far, everything had failed. So, um, so Banner, um, so David, having basically, having nothing else, um, he, um, he basically starts, basically having, nobody else. He starts testing and doing, experiments on himself. So so obviously, he's going against, he's going against, government protocol. And, um, so, um, so Bruce's mother, Edith, tells David that, that she's pregnant and that, she's going to have a baby. And, um, and he, um, and so David, so after, Bruce is born, he starts, doing experiments on, um, Bruce. And, um, he starts doing experiments on Bruce. And he, and and remember, that he's going to become the Hulk at some point, right? But, um, so as David is watching, um, grow, as David is watching Bruce grow up, faster, faster than, than a normal kid would, um, he is starting to notice, um, he is starting to notice, some different, um, he's starting to notice, things that are, like out of the ordinary, like his skin. Like there's this one scene of Bruce, in his, still a baby. Um, his skin starts to, change, like, how, his skin, starts to, um, his skin starts to, like, how, like when you get sick, like, how, like when you're about to throw up, you turn green. That's basically what's happening to Bruce in that moment, except obviously he's not about to throw up. He's, um, um, this is, a side effect of, of the experiment. So Ross eventually finds out what, David has been doing. And, um, he comes in and says, he comes in and says, yeah, I just, we just went through we just went through your lab. We found, we found, blood samples in your lab. They were human blood. Um, and, um, and as a result of that, Ross has David thrown off. The project. And, Ross has David, thrown off the project. So David, um, Fury, so David, furious, and, and, so David furious, he's so angry, he decides, he decides that he's going to blow up the lab. So he decides that he's going to blow up the lab. And this is now, he decides he's going to blow up the lab and basically unleash, Um, yeah, and he decides that he's going to blow up the lab and basically let loose, major gamma, major gamma, major gamma sorry, I can't talk today. Decontamination. So there's so there's this, there's this alarm going off, basically warning everybody, um, basically warning everybody, there's major, there's a major, there's like, a major bomb that's about to go off. You guys need to evacuate and, and get out of here. Um, so David, um, so David comes back home, and so David comes back home, and um, so David comes back home, and his parents start arguing, and then later on we get, um, and then and then not and then a couple of minutes later we get a time skip to a much older Bruce, like a teenage Bruce, um, who just woke up from a nightmare, um, who just woke up from um, who just woke up from who just woke up from a nightmare that has a nightmare that haunts him throughout, um, throughout the events of this movie and throughout his life. So he wakes up, screaming and shaking, and we find out that he was that he was adopted, um, by a woman named Marion Krenzler. So when Bruce was adopted, he took the name, because Bruce, because he was so young at the time, um, you know, he um, he doesn't he doesn't remember, like not only like his childhood, but he doesn't remember ever being called Bruce Banner. So um, so the name that he grew up, so the game that he the name that he grew up knowing, was the name, that he took, when his um was the name that he took, when his mother, when Miriam adopted him. So um so we have a um so she comes in and, and comforts him, and so she comes in and, and comforts him, um so she comes in and comforts him, and, and hugs him and says, and she says to him, another nightmare. And Bruce goes, I don't know. And Bruce is like, I don't know, I don't remember. um so then we get um so then we get a so then we get another time skip, um to an adult Bruce, who now works at the hang on, who now works at the um yeah, who now works at the Berkeley Nuclear, um Biotechnology Institute. um there he meets, and um and they are and him and Betty Ross, who have just recently broken up. Um, they are um, their research is about they are trying to repair um, they are trying to repair, I think, um damaged like skin tissue, I think, or something along those lines. They're trying to use basically they're trying to use nanomats and gamma radiation to repair, I think, like damaged skin tissue, or something like that. Something like that, something along those lines. And um so um and and so far they have not been successful. They've been testing, on like lab animals and stuff like that, and every time um and it's a failure basically every single time. um so later we get a and beware, Bruce is has not turned into the Hulk yet. Um in this movie, the Hulk has been something that has been, that has been like something very, very deep inside him, um, like all his life, but still basically, has yet to come out. Um, so later we get a scene. Um, Later we get a scene of um, one of Bruce's coworkers, Harper, trying to fix the gamma ray, and he says to him, um, and oh, I'm sorry, something else I completely forgot to mention. Um, One of the characters in this movie, Glenn Talbot, who um, who is head of a company called Atheon. Um, who is head of a company called Atheon, and one of and basically what they do is they buy up smaller companies and their research and their um and their whatever they're working on. They're basically looking to turn that into a weapon. And um and Bruce, obviously, and both Bruce and Betty refuse. Talbot comes to them with an offer, and basically and Talbot says, and Bruce says, that's not, he's like, yeah, no, that's not what we're doing. We're doing this science, for everyone. Um we're not going to do, we're not going to do what what you want. So um yeah, so later we get a scene of Harper trying to fix the gamma ray. um I'm trying to fix the gamma ray. One of the circuits one of the circuits apparently was fried. So he asks Bruce for assistance, and then Bruce comes over, and um, Bruce comes over and um, Bruce comes over and to take a look at it, and all of a sudden there's like a spark. And as Harper is trying to fix it, he triggers like some sort of like spark, um, or something um, that makes the gamma ray go critical, and the the gamma ray levels just like completely skyrocket. And excuse me, sorry. um, they completely skyrocket, and the gamma ray is literally Harper is literally, Harper, unable to unable, to get up and, and move, um unable to get up and move. Bruce just pushes him out of the way, and the gamma ray is literally aimed like directly at Harper, and the gamma levels are so high that Betty can't stop it in time. So um, so Bruce, um, um, so Bruce, not being able to think of, anything else to do in that moment, because, Harper was going to die, billions, billions and billions of people were going to die. So he just throws himself in front of the gamma ray, taking in all of that radiation. And, um, so obviously Betty is wondering, like how he's still alive, because obviously, it's killed, everything else that it's come into contact with, the gamma ray, from like their lab experiments, and everything else that they've tried. Um, so, um, and while, so Bruce, while he's recovering, he is visited by this janitor who works, the night shift, the same as Bruce does. And he tells, he basically tells Bruce, your name isn't Krensler, it's Banner, Bruce Banner. And he basically says to him, I'm your father. And Bruce, and Bruce, Bruce, who always believed that, that his parents were dead. His parents died, when he was a kid. Um, from what he was told, his whole life, that his parents died when he was a kid. Um, and David Banner was like, no, 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 that's not true. That's what they want you to believe. And and he tells him, um, yeah, he tells him, Betty's father, he tells him, he's like, Betty's father had me locked away for 30 years. And, um, away from you, away from our work, away from, away from everything. But um, eventually that they were basically forced to declare him, to they were basically forced to declare him sane, and let him go. So, um and it isn't until like the literally like the first like 40 minutes into the movie, where we finally get, some Hulk action. He's working late one night, and um he's working late one night, and he is, um he has these various like memories, like fragmented, conversations and memories going through his head. His encounter with Talbot, um his um his conversation with his father, when he came to visit him, in recovery. Just, all these different, feelings and emotions that are going through his head. And that finally leads him, to turn, into the Hulk and destroy the lab. And the Hulk in this movie, the special effects in this movie are so and the special effects in this movie are so fucking atrocious. Like it's not even funny. Like I mean, I can name, it's like, I can, yeah, and I mean, yeah, like one person could argue, oh, oh, well, this is, this is 2003 and yada yada yada. No, 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 no. I can name two movies. I can name two movies off the top of my head that had better special effects. Twister, which came out in 2000, and Ghost Rider, which came out 2 years later. So for those of you who for those of you who are trying to argue with me right now, saying, "Oh, well, that was 2003 and blah 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 blah," yeah, no, 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 no. These special effects, I mean, it just literally, like, it looks like a cartoon. It looks like a cartoon. It's so it's so bad. I mean, I literally, like, it looks so incredibly fake. It's literally like, I mean, the fact that this is what they decided to go with. I mean, and not to mention, like how big the Hulk is in this movie. Now obviously, yes, the Hulk is obviously going to be big, but there's a huge massive difference between having him look like the Hulk and having him look like King Kong. And that's what he looked like in this movie. He looked like King Kong. He he in this movie he was like 15 feet tall. That's the size of King Kong. In the 2008 Hulk movie, the Incredible Hulk, the reboot, he was only like 9 feet, which is pretty much, how the Hulk should look. 9 feet tall, big, muscular. That's the Hulk. This, this pile of dog shit that Ang Lee shot out is not the Hulk. It's not. And the fact that Ang Lee was allowed anywhere near this movie is ridiculous. I seriously, I would really like to know the name of the person who thought that Ang Lee would be a good choice for this, because this was awful. This was beyond. I and like, I get like wanting to build up, like the suspense, and stuff like that of the Hulk, to make it, so it makes it, all the more satisfying, when they eventually do, when it eventually is time to show him. However, I wouldn't mind that, but the fact is, you have a backstory that's just so boring and stupid. And I mean, you have y- you have a, like I said, it's literally like it's 40 minutes before we even get like any Hulk action. And when we finally do get Hulk action, it's literally some of the worst CGI that you'll ever see in your life. I mean, literally, like, I mean, if you can think of a worse movie with worse CGI, please tell me. But please tell me, because seriously, I would love to know. But this is just, I mean, this is, um, but yeah, I mean, this is, so later, um, so later on, um, Betty is, um, Betty Ross is not quite, um, she's not quite sure like what's going on yet at this point. All she knows is that, there was some sort of explosion at the lab, at the lab that night. Um, they're obviously not letting anybody in. Um, and, um, Bruce's, Bruce, isn't really sure how to, like how to explain it. He's not entirely sure like what happened himself. Um, so it isn't until, it isn't until later, um, Bruce tells Betty um, about his encounter with, David Banner, his father. So Betty starts doing, like some investigating um, of her own, um, to try to figure out, like what's, like how Bruce ended up like this, and basically what they can do, um, if there's any way, like to, reverse the process or whatever. So she goes to, um, so she starts doing, some investigating of her own, um, and she, and as a result of that, David sends, um, David Banner has also been doing some experiments of his own. He managed to take some of Bruce's own, some of Bruce's own DNA, um, and um, and transfer them into ordinary dogs, and basically make them, um, basically make them like gamma dogs, the like gamma dogs, where they basically have like the strength of the Hulk. They're very, very unstable, but they're very, very powerful. And also, and again, much like the rest of, and again, much like, much like the rest of the CGI in this movie, it's some of the worst CGI you'll ever see in your life. So, um, so, um, so he sends, his dogs, after Betty, basically for, sticking her nose in where it wasn't wanted. And um and the Hulk, obviously has to go and, and save her, um has to go and save her. Betty's relationship with, her father, played by Sam Elliott, who is definitely one of the only good things about this movie. Sam Elliott is such a fantastic actor. Um, and he just, he always gives, a dynamite performance in pretty much anything he's in. Um, her relationship with her father is very, 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 very complicated. She, you got to remember, she loves, she obviously loves Bruce, but at the same time, her father hates, um, David Banner. So he very much views Bruce as kind of, as basically, as basically, like a sins of the father type thing. And, um, and obviously, views the Hulk, as a threat, as a threat to, national security. So, um, so they, so he, so throughout the movie, the Hulk, General Ross is pursuing, David Banner, Bruce Banner, and, and the Hulk, excuse me, basically trying to get to the bottom, excuse me, sorry, basically trying to get to the bottom of, like how Bruce is mixed up in this, because he doesn't know. He doesn't, he knows that Bruce is mixed up in it somehow, but he doesn't really know, like the full extent of it. Um, he doesn't really know, like the full extent of it. He doesn't know. Um, he actually believes there's this one point in the movie where he's interrogating, um, Banner, trying to get him to remember, um, that memory that's haunted him all of his, all his life, of his mother and father arguing, um, that day, in the bedroom when he came home, and and Bruce is telling, and Bruce is telling him, I'd like to help you, but but seriously, I don't remember. I was always told that my father was dead. And um and and Ross obviously isn't is Ross obviously, like isn't buying any of it. He um he's like screaming at him, and he's like screaming at him. He's like, he's like screaming at him. He's like, you were 4 years old when, when you saw it. He's like, and and Banner goes, when I saw what? And he's, and like he genuinely like does not remember. Like the memory is so bad that his mind has basically suppressed it from his memory. That's basically, like how bad this memory is. And um and yeah, so eventually, um so Betty, is trying to get Ross to basically, um Betty is basically trying to get Ross. She's like, look, I want, she's explaining to him, she's asking him, like why, like why is he such a threat to you? Like why, um, like why do you have to, why do you have to treat him like this? And she, and and he, and and uh, Ross pretty much, fears that, because he's, his father's son, he is afraid that, well, number one, he doesn't trust him. Number two, if you look at, like horrible, if you look at, like all the horrible things his father did, um, to Bruce, um, to Bruce, um, to Bruce's mother, to just, pretty much everyone around him. Um, you'll see that, while yes, his father was a monster, and his father was, um, and while yes, his father was a monster, and and completely psychotic, Bruce is not, um, while yes, he may be, his father's son, by blood, he is not his father's son in terms of, like personality, um, or anything, along those lines. Like the like in that regard, they're the complete opposite of one another. Um, and so eventually, reluctantly, but eventually, Ross, you know, Betty, Betty says to her father, she's like, look, at least let me try. Nobody knows him better than I do. Um, so eventually, very reluctantly, but eventually, Ross, Ross agrees to help. Um, Ross agrees to let um, Betty help Bruce. So the military takes um, so the military takes them back to um, Bruce's Bruce's they take Bruce and Betty back to the house that they grew up the house that Bruce grew up in, um, and to see if it triggers um, to see if it triggers anything. And as Bruce is walking around, the the uh, deserted and now abandoned house, as he's walking around and taking everything in, he starts to remember a little bit. He doesn't remember, that he doesn't yet remember like that huge, memory that's that's been haunting him all his life. Um, but like he looks at a table, but like he looks at a table, and he remembers that that's the table that his mother um that he and his mother, went under the day that David, blew up the lab, and you know the day that the day that David, blew up the lab and let loose all that gamma radiation. um it isn't until and Talbot, who eventually goes over Ross's head, and it gets to a point, where Ross basically can't do anything anymore, because Talbot is basically, now the one in charge. Um, he takes Bruce prisoner, and puts him in like this tank. Um, and puts him in like this tank, in like in this puts him in like this tank, and basically forces him to remember, um you know basically forces him to remember, those memories that that have been, suppressed from his memory all these years. um and it turns out that what actually happened was, the day that David came home, the day that David, you know, the day that David came home, after the incident, um, he took, he took Bruce's mother, Edith, into the bedroom, and basically laid it all out for her, and basically told her everything, that he had been doing. Um, and basically says to her, um, basically says to her, um, basically says to her, um, his father, um, Bruce's, David was very, very much in love um, Bruce's mother. She was basically the love of his life. Um, and she very, very much wanted a child. So the minute Um, um, okay. Sorry guys, I'm just looking at my notes here. Um, so he basically, um, so so David knew even from, the minute that Bruce, was conceived. Um, yeah, so Bruce could tell the minute, David could tell that the minute, Bruce was conceived. He knew, David knew that, um, David knew, that he hadn't really given her, um, he hadn't really given her a child. Um, he had given her something along the lines of, um, he had given her, really something along the lines of a monster. And, um, and, um, and he knew, you know, eh, David pretty much knew at that point, David pretty much knew at that point, David pretty much knew at that point, um, that he should have put a stop to it right there. But, um, but he ended up being overwhelmed by curiosity and, um, curiosity about, his experiments. He was obsessed with his experiments, with his work. And that ended up being, a bigger, a bigger priority than protecting, um, his own son. But eventually, um, excuse me, sorry. Um, but eventually, um, but eventually, um, but as David, but as David watched his son, grow up, and, as David watched his son, as David, watched his son, you know, grow up, and as the events unfolded, David began to imagine, the horrors of um, what he had created. And at that point, at that point, it became, it became about compassion. And at that moment, it became, it became about protecting his son. So, um, but at that point, it was basically too late. And that's when General Ross found out, what David Banner had been doing. So they took away, um, so General Ross, the government, they took away, you know, di- you know, David's chance to cure Bruce. Um, and as a result of that, and as a result of that, Betty's father, threw him out. And as I said before, had him locked away for 30 years. So, and yeah, I mean, this whole movie is just, it's so dumb and it's so stupid. And, there was no, it doesn't, it not only doesn't speak to, you know, the source material and, and everything else, but it's just, it's like, oh, it's like, oh, daddy turned me into a monster, so I didn't accidentally turn myself into a monster, daddy turned me into a monster. And the whole, because if you because even, like if you grew up with the TV show, right? He which also had nothing to do with the original comic book. However, growing up as a kid, um growing up as a kid, um I grew up, I grew up watching, like all the classic reruns, um, of the TV show. As a kid, as a kid, it was like, it was like my favorite show, like ever. You can't see it behind this row here, but I actually own all 5 seasons on DVD. And then I have an autograph of Lou Ferrigno hanging up in my room. Um, but in the TV show, um, in the TV show, that he was trying to, he was trying to figure out what made um, those people so incredibly strong in dire need, um, in dire need situations where they were able to save, their loved ones, or um, their loved ones, or, or whoever they needed, y- you know, to save and or protect in that moment. Um, whereas David, failed, to save, um, his wife. Again, this is, again, in case you're lost, I'm talking about the TV show, not the movie. Um, which leads to David, doing, um, some experiments with gamma radiation, and then um, he accidentally overdoses on gamma radiation, and then, he later on he turns into the Hulk. But in the movie, um, they're spinning it as, oh yeah, Daddy turned me into a monster because of, because of some experiments that he did, on himself, before I was born, and then, pass it on to me after I was born. And, the whole concept is just so over the top, ridiculous, and stupid. And, it's just not, yeah, it's just bad. It's bad writing, bad direction. It's just, the whole thing is just completely creatively bankrupt. And it's not, um and it's not something, that fits for, for the Hulk at all. It's not, um this is not, this is, I get, obviously, I get it, this is the early 2000s, they weren't, this is obviously, years before, the stuff that we have today. But like, even so, I mean, but even so, and like some of the 2000s, comic book movies were really good. Like X-Men was, X-Men was great. X-Men 2 was even better. Um, Sam Raimi Spider-Man, um, The Punisher 2004, which is a personal favorite of mine. If you haven't seen my review on that, please check it out. Um, you know, um, Ghost Rider, Daredevil, I mean, um, all of those I thought, were pretty damn good for what they were. They aren't, they aren't, um, the Daredevil movie, especially the director's cut, which I will most probably do a review on at some point, because that movie definitely that movie is definitely an underrated masterpiece in my book. But yeah, no, this I mean, this is, I mean, the fact that this is what they went with. I mean, and it's boring, and it drags. It's very, very talky. Like I said before, it's 40 minutes, before we get, any Hulk action. And then after that, we don't get any Hulk action again until, like towards the end of the movie. I want to say, like the second half of the movie. Um, and it's, it's just, I it's just and the one thing that I will give this movie credit for, though, the one thing I will give this movie credit for is that it didn't pull the bullshit that the MCU is pulling these days, where they have completely turned him into a fucking comedian. I hate that. You know, I, you know, well, like, as much as I can't stand this movie, I will take this over what they've done to the Hulk nowadays in the MCU any day. I'm serious. Seriously, like, I'm not even joking. Like, that is just that. Well, I mean, like what they did to him in Endgame. So, what they did to him in Endgame, I honestly don't know which is worse in terms of, in terms of, in terms of, character design. But yeah, no, this is, this is just one pathetic sad excuse for a Hulk movie. And I the fact that this is what they went with all those years ago, I is just I mean, you have Nick Nolte as, the Absorbing Man, who is, a classic villain from, from the comic books. But he's but if you follow the comic books, you would know, that, I think you would know, that he's this big muscular, um bald guy who carries around a ball and chain. And in anything that he touches, he absorbs that and becomes, excuse me, whether it's, whether it's rock or stone or whatever, that's what he turns into. And and the fact that they got Nick Nolte to play the Absorbing Man is just beyond. I mean, yeah, literally, like, I can't even find a word to describe that right now. It's so friggin' ridiculous. But and from what I understand, it was originally going to be somebody else. It wasn't Nick Nolte originally. I don't remember the name of the actor um that was originally supposed to do it. But yeah, but from what I understand, it would have been a lot closer to, to the character from the comics, and not, the pile of crap that we ended up getting. But yeah, no, to turn David Banner into, like, this, like, power hungry, um, into, like, this, like, power hungry psycho. And then later on, have him become the Absorbing Man. It's so friggin' ridiculous. And it's so incredibly stupid. And it's just, And and again, like Ang Lee never should have been allowed anywhere near this movie. I mean, Ang Lee, he, he's obviously never read a comic book in his life, and the fact that this is what we ended up getting for the time is really, really sad. I mean, some of these movies I can, because the MCU is such a shit show these days, some of these comic book movies I can look back on and go, and some of these early comic book movies I can fondly look back on and go, yeah, and go, yeah, remember when comic book movies were like this, and and we had this and this, and and just think back fondly at those at those moments and those memories, um and in those memories. But yeah, no, if you're a Hulk fan and if you haven't seen this movie, good. I'm totally serious. If you haven't seen this movie, I really, 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 really beg you not to waste your time with it, because it's garbage. It's literally, and like, I've been a Hulk fan all my life. Like I said before, I grew up with the TV show, watching all the classic reruns. But this crap is a perfect example of how not to do your movie. Just, yeah, just I beg you, just don't watch it. Just don't, don't watch it. Don't watch it because you like Marvel. Don't watch it because you're a Hulk fan. Just don't watch it. Seriously. Seriously, just don't waste your time. I I I'm serious. Just don't waste your time. Anyway, let me know what you guys think. Um let me know what you guys thought of this, of this pile of garbage. Um, and like, subscribe. And now I'm going to go have a couple more beers and hopefully erase this movie from my memory. So, anyway, like, subscribe, and peace.